In this video, we'll be looking at folksonomies, also known as social bookmarking services. I'm Mark Pegram, and I'll be taking you through this material. Here's the usual copyright notice that you see at the start of each online video. If you're like most people, you probably have hundreds of bookmarks in your web browser. Folksonomies represent a way of storing the same information in a more organized manner. The most popular of today's folksonomy services is Diigo. This is my Diigo account, where you can see some of the items I've saved recently. They're all connected with new technologies in education. You can sign up for a folksonomy service like Diigo for free. Once you've done so, you'll be prompted to download a button to your browser bar. It'll look something like the D symbol that you can see in the top right-hand corner of this slide. Whenever you find a useful reference or resource online that you'd like to store in your folksonomy, you simply click on that button. For example, here's a video about Web 3.0 that I've come across. I decide that I want to keep a record of that video, so I click on the D button. Up comes a menu with a number of options. For example, I can annotate this page or choose to read it later. However, what I want to do on this occasion is to save it to my folksonomy. So I choose the Save item on the top right-hand corner of this menu. Once I've done so, a dialog box opens up. There will be a suggested title, but I can change that to whatever I want. In this case, I've indicated that the resource is in video format. I've given the title, the name of the creator, and the year that it was posted. I can add some notes if I like in the description box, but what's most important is that I add a tag or tags in the tagging box. In this particular case, the video is about Web 3.0 and about the notion of the semantic web, so I've added 2 tags. But I can add as many tags as I want. You'll notice that there are some recent tags and recommended tags underneath. I can choose to use them or not. Once I've added my tags, I simply hit the Save button, and that's it. This item will be saved in my folksonomy. A folksonomy service like Diigo automatically generates an index known as a tag cloud. What you're looking at here is the first part of the tag cloud for my folksonomy, which is embedded in the digital learning website. You'll notice that there are some terms in larger and heavier fonts. That reflects how often a particular indexing term has been used. So you can see, for example, that a term like augmented reality is a more common indexing term than something like 3D printing. That, in turn, is more common than 3G or 4G. So this is a visual snapshot of the key points of emphasis in this particular index. This kind of index, as I've mentioned, is known as a tag cloud. Okay, let's say that 6 months or a year after finding that Web 3.0 video, I want to locate it again. But I can't remember the exact title or the name of the creator or even which service it's hosted on. So I go to my tag cloud and I scroll down until I find the term Web 3.0 and I click on it. Up comes a list of all of the items that I have indexed with that particular term, Web 3.0. And you can see the video that I'm looking for is there at the top of the list on the screen. So, as you can see, folksonomies make it very easy to organize the materials that you're indexing, and therefore it's easy to find those materials again. One of the biggest advantages is that you can use as many indexing terms as you wish, so that it's very easy to locate specific items later. You can search for a single tag, but you can also search for combinations of 2 or 3 or more tags amongst all of the items that you've saved. A number of years ago, there was another popular folksonomy service called Delicious. In fact, this is the service that originally popularized the idea of social bookmarking and tag clouds, and it was very heavily used by educators. Changes over a number of years led many educators to stop working with Delicious and set up accounts with Digo instead. It was then announced in mid-2017 that Delicious would cease operation. I'm going to show you a few examples now of the use of tag clouds. The older examples are created with Delicious, the newer ones with Digo. This page was created by a member of the Student Services staff at the University of Western Australia on a course that I ran quite a few years ago. The page that she set up was called English Language Corner, and it was designed for international students who wanted to improve different aspects of their language. At the bottom of the page, you can see the tag cloud, where students could go to look up, for example, Australian words or grammar or presentations, and under each of those indexing terms, they would find a list of relevant links. But the idea here was that students could also contribute their own resources so that this tag cloud would grow in size and usefulness over time as a collaborative community effort. Websites are not the only place you can embed tag clouds. Here's an example of a tag cloud embedded in a blog created by a science teacher. And here's an example of a tag cloud embedded in a wiki by a pre-service primary teacher. She put together a list of basic resources to do with the food chain, with the ecosystem, and with animals. These gave her students a starting point for their research. But each group of students was also asked to find a number of additional resources to add to the class folksonomy. Not only that, at the end of the year, she kept this folksonomy, and the plan was to roll it over to the next year so that the following year's cohort could build on what the previous year's cohort had done. So there's no reason why a folksonomy can't actually be a collaboration across time as well. Here's an example of a Digo tag cloud created by a science teacher I worked with in Perth quite a few years ago. It's part of an ICT integration blog where staff and students could go to get ideas about the use of new technologies in the classroom. And here's an example of a Digo tag cloud embedded in a pre-service teacher's ePortfolio in 2016. This illustrates the value of a folksonomy and a tag cloud as part of a PLN or personal learning network. You might like to pause the video and read what this pre-service teacher has to say about the value of having a Digo folksonomy. Okay, here's a detailed explanation spread over 15 slides by a Singaporean teacher I worked with in 2015, talking about the introduction of Digo into a general education course where students were asked to find, catalogue, and work with media articles about everyday current affairs. You might like to pause the video and have a close look at the slides that are of most interest to you, and in particular, you might like to focus on the explanations given by the Singaporean teacher. And that's the final slide in this sequence, rounding off what I'm sure you'll agree is a very nice overview of just how well DIGO can be integrated into a course of study at high school level. Of course, you could do something similar at other levels as well, notably at tertiary level. There are a number of different advantages presented by folksonomies. As Smith points out here, the most popular tags, that is the ones that show up in the largest and heaviest fonts, do create a kind of rough consensus on the subject of a resource, but minority viewpoints can always be represented there in the smaller tags. Continuing in the same vein, Howard Rheingold points out here that folksonomies are more democratic and broader than traditional taxonomies. You don't have to decide all your categories beforehand, which means that folksonomies are infinitely extensible as new ideas come up and new developments occur. Here's an interesting quote from Mark Pesce about the importance of sharing in a modern educational system. Folksonomies are an ideal way of facilitating that kind of sharing. You might like to pause the video to read his comment closely. Let's have a look now at some variations on the idea of a folksonomy. In other words, other ways of collecting and displaying resources online. A service that has become very popular with educators in the last few years is Lesson Paths, formerly known as MentorMob. It's a place where you can collect together a whole lot of resources in the form of a playlist. So, for example, if students are studying the solar system, you might collect together some text-based websites, some videos, and some quizzes. Students can then work through those materials step by step, or, as with a playlist, they can move through the materials in different orders depending on their interests and their needs. Of course, it's not just teachers who can collect materials in this way for students. Students could also collect material for their peers. Scribble is another fairly new service that allows the building of a class library so that resources can be easily shared between students. Another similar, recently popular service is BlendSpace, available in both web and app versions. In this particular example, you can see some teacher training or lecturer development materials focused on the use of new technologies with students. There is another kind of variation on folksonomies, which is not really about the indexing itself, but about the tag cloud display format. We call this variation a word cloud. It looks very much like a tag cloud, but it's not an index and you can't click on the different terms in the cloud to be taken to lists of resources. What it does is to show the frequency of occurrence of particular terms in a text. Let me show you some examples. The most popular word cloud service is called Wordle. What's happened here is that Abraham Lincoln's inaugural presidential speech has been run through Wordle. Wordle has taken out the small words, for example, the and so on, and left in the main nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. You can see at a glance which words Abraham Lincoln was using most often in his speech. So this is a very interesting visual snapshot of the key themes of his speech. That's interesting in itself. But it gets even more interesting if we compare Abraham Lincoln's inaugural presidential speech with the inaugural speeches of later American presidents. You might like to pause the video as we move through some other example speeches. The last few examples of word clouds were all generated automatically from texts, but you can also generate word clouds manually, and that's what's happened here. This is an English literature teacher I worked with a few years ago. She's asked her students to indicate what they think the main themes are of John Fowles' novel, The Collector. So you can see they've chosen to put what they consider to be the key themes and the key terms in a very large font, and then there is a hierarchy of fonts as they move down towards less important themes. So this is a visual representation by this group of students of how they see the key themes of this particular novel. There are other services which are similar to Wordle. This one is called Word It Out, and it's been used here by a pre-service teacher in an automated way to highlight the keywords which have come up in her critical reflections over a couple of years. Some other word cloud services, like this one, Word Mosaic, allow you to arrange your word clouds into overall shapes. Those shapes might be a lock, as you can see here, or a love heart, as you can see here. Here, a pre-service teacher has used another word cloud service, Tagxedo, to create apple-shaped word clouds which contain the key terminology that comes up in a number of the national professional standards for Australian teachers. And here's a 2016 pre-service teacher using a service simply called Word Cloud in order to represent the key points of emphasis in her teaching philosophy in the form of a map of the world. There's actually an important design element here related to considerations of information literacy, as pointed out by a group of librarians I worked with in Melbourne in 2015 and 2016. What they've done is to create a number of different word clouds from student queries. In each case, as you'll see over the next few slides, the word clouds look very different and different elements tend to jump out at the viewer. You might like to pause each of these slides and see which elements strike you the most in each case. So your choice of which word cloud service to use and which word cloud design to use should be dictated, at least in part, by the key messages or themes that you want to come through the word cloud. Finally, here's an example of a service which makes good use of the word cloud metaphor to help students improve their writing. A student can run an essay through the WordSift service, and it will show the words that have been used most often, as well as helping the student to find alternatives, thereby enriching the vocabulary being used. This service has been used quite widely by language teachers. So, folksonomies are a very useful tool. In their basic indexing format, they are a very organic mode of indexing, and they allow individual or group indexing. Folksonomies are also the basis of some other Web 2.0 services, particularly because the tag cloud metaphor is widely used across the web and underpins the idea of a word cloud. On the downside, tagging is very much dependent on language and literacy levels. But for that very reason, getting students to create a folksonomy, to create a tag cloud, can be a useful literacy exercise. Naturally, folksonomies do lack top-down taxonomic control, but that is at the same time one of their advantages. They are organic, they are generated from the bottom up, and they invite everyone into the indexing process. Hence, of course, the replacement of the term taxonomy by the term folksonomy. This is a resource created by the folk, that is, the ordinary users of the internet. That said, we're hearing more and more nowadays from institutions and organizations, including libraries, for example, that there is perhaps a place for both taxonomies and folksonomies in a digitally mediated world. For more information about folksonomies, including a summary of the main points that we've made here, as well as links to folksonomy and word cloud services, feel free to go to the Folksonomies page of the Digital Learning website. You can see the address at the bottom of the screen.